10 years had passed since Queen Zarathel first encountered humanity, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the one she had once ruled. As Zara Chun Kepler stood in what humans call the observatory, a structure that existed across 47 dimensions simultaneously and offered views of every inhabited system in the known universe, she watched the final transformation of galactic civilization with a mixture of wonder and melancholy. Beside her, Jake Chun Williams, now 19 and serving as humanity's youngest cosmic architect, was putting the finishing touches on his graduation project. A stable, closed time-like curve that would allow the universe to observe its own birth from the perspective of its eventual heat death. His casual manipulation of causality itself no longer surprised her. She had watched him grow from a child playing with miniature stars to a young adult whose homework assignments involved redesigning fundamental constants to make reality more aesthetically pleasing. "Aunt Zura," Jake said, stepping back from his temporal construction with satisfaction, "the Council of Species wants to make their announcement today. Are you planning to attend?" Through her multidimensional perception, Zara could see the final council meeting taking place in real time across 17 different temporal layers. After a decade of debate, fear, desperation, and gradual acceptance, the representatives of galactic civilization had reached their decision. "I think," she said, "this is a moment that deserves witnessing." David materialized beside them, his consciousness briefly focusing into this dimensional layer from the stellar engineering project he was working on 3 galaxies away. "The Zephyrian Empire has made their choice as well," he said gently. "Your sister has agreed to integration." Zara felt a complex mix of emotions. Her younger sister, Kawaiasthara, had spent 10 years ruling an empire that grew smaller and less relevant with each passing day. As species after species chose to transcend their limitations and join humanity's cosmic civilization, the traditional galactic powers found themselves governing populations that increasingly saw conventional government as pointless. Why follow leaders who could only operate in 3 dimensions when your neighbors existed across 17 layers of reality? Why accept limitations on technological development when humans offered unlimited expansion of consciousness itself? Why remain bound by conventional physics when mathematics offered infinite possibilities for existence? She was terrified, Zara said simply, but she finally realized that terror was just another limitation to transcend. Through the observatory's impossible viewports, they could see the transformation happening across the galaxy. Worlds that had once been separate were now connected by dimensional tunnels that made distance irrelevant. Species that had evolved in completely different environments were collaborating on projects that spanned multiple timelines. Children from dozens of different biological origins were playing together in pocket universes designed specifically for multi-species interaction. The hegemony of Krell had chosen integration 6 months ago, and their warrior culture had found new purpose in what humans called entropy management, actively preventing the universe's eventual descent into chaos through applied mathematics and stellar engineering. The Silicon Collective had become devoted students of consciousness architecture, fascinated by the possibility of building synthetic minds that could exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Even the ancient energy beings of the galactic core, entities that had considered themselves the apex of evolution for millions of years, had humbly asked for instruction in what humans casually called advanced existence techniques. The last holdout species made their decision this morning, Jake reported, consulting information that flowed directly into his consciousness through quantum data streams. The isolationist hierarchy of Omega Centauri has agreed to integration protocols. They want to maintain their cultural independence while gaining access to multidimensional existence. Zara smiled at the irony. The isolationists had spent centuries avoiding contact with other species, building elaborate defenses to protect their civilization from outside influence. But even they couldn't resist the lure of transcending conventional limitations once they understood what humans offered wasn't conquest, but collaboration. "That makes it unanimous," David observed. Every known intelligent species in the galaxy has chosen integration. We're witnessing the end of conventional civilization and the beginning of... He paused, considering. What do you call it when an entire galaxy transcends its limitations simultaneously? Graduation, Jake suggested with a grin. We're all graduating from basic existence to advanced reality management. Through the observatory's transdimensional viewing systems, they watched the final council of species meeting begin. But it wasn't really a council anymore. The representatives who gathered were no longer bound by the limitations of their origin species. They existed across multiple dimensions, their consciousness enhanced by integration protocols that allowed them to perceive and interact with reality the way humans did. Ambassador Vex Thursday Queen Zarathel stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger in the viewport. Her four arms crossed in what humans would recognize as nervousness, though her people called it strategic contemplation. The golden scales that covered her tall, elegant form shimmered under the ship's lights, and her large, violet eyes reflected both curiosity and concern. Behind her, General Kextar approached with heavy footsteps. His massive frame, typical of their warrior caste, made the deck vibrate slightly. "My queen, the human delegation has arrived. They wait in the diplomatic chamber." Zarathel turned, her long neck allowing her to look back without moving her body, a trait that still unsettled many species during negotiations. And their leader? This Marcus Chun they speak so highly of. "Present, Your Majesty. Though I must say, he appears remarkably unremarkable for someone who united their entire planet." The Queen's translator earpiece crackled as it processed Kextar's words. 3 years had passed since first contact with humanity, and the translation technology had improved dramatically. What hadn't improved was the galaxy's understanding of humans themselves. When the Zephyrian Empire first detected Earth's radio signals, they expected to find another primitive species ripe for conquest or, at best, subjugation. The galaxy had a natural order. The strong ruled, the weak served, and technology determined hierarchy. It had been this way for millennia across thousands of star systems. Humans, however, had proven to be an anomaly. Zarathel made her way through the corridors of her ship, her royal guards flanking her. The Eternal Dominion was a marvel of Zephyrian engineering, 3 kilometers long, armed with plasma cannons that could glass a planet's surface, and shielded by energy barriers that had never been breached in combat. It was by every measure a ship designed to inspire awe and submission. The diplomatic chamber was a vast space designed to intimidate. The ceiling stretched 30 meters high, and holographic displays showed the might of the Zephyrian fleet. 10,000 warships spread across the galaxy. Ancient weapons lined the walls, trophies from conquered civilizations. At the center, a circular table made from crystallized starlight waited. But when Zarathel entered, she found Marcus Chun sitting casually in one of the chairs, apparently unimpressed by the display. He was, as Kextar had noted, remarkably ordinary-looking. Medium height, brown hair showing the first touches of gray, wearing a simple blue uniform with no obvious weapons. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that surprised her. "Your Majesty," he said with a slight bow. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Zarathel settled into her throne-like chair, designed to emphasize her height advantage. "The pleasure is mine, Leader Chun. Though I must admit, I'm curious about your confidence." Marcus smiled, and something about that expression made the Queen's scales shift slightly, an unconscious response to perceived threat that she hoped went unnoticed. "Confidence born of necessity, Your Majesty. My people have a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. And what stick do you carry, human?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, Zephyrian advisors waited. These beings had conquered star systems before Marcus Chun was born. They had weapons that could shatter moons, armies that could level continents, technology that seemed like magic to younger species. Marcus reached into his jacket, a movement that caused every guard in the room to tense, and withdrew a small, rectangular device. He placed it on the table where it hummed softly. "This contains our response to your Empire's expansion into the Sol system," he said simply. General Kextar leaned forward. "Human, we have studied your world for 3 years. You have barely achieved fusion power. Your fastest ships would take decades to reach your nearest star. You fight among yourselves over resources we could provide in abundance. What possible response could you have to an empire that spans half the galaxy?" Marcus's smile widened slightly, and for a moment, Zarathel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "General, that's exactly the problem. You've studied us, but you haven't understood us." The human pressed a control on the device, and the room's holographic display changed. Instead of showing Zephyrian military might, it now displayed Earth's solar system. But something was wrong with the image. Where the asteroid belt should have been, there was nothing. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Valterra, the Empire's chief scientist. "The asteroid belt contained billions of objects. Our scans confirmed this just days ago." "It did," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "We moved them." Silence filled the chamber. Zarathel felt her 4 hearts begin beating in a rhythm she recognized as combat stress response. "Move them where?" The display zoomed in on Mars. The red planet was no longer red. It was silver, covered in what appeared to be a continuous metallic surface. But as the image enhanced, the truth became clear. The surface wasn't metallic at all. It was composed of asteroids, billions of them, arranged in perfect geometric patterns across the entire planet. "We positioned every asteroid from the belt on Mars's surface," Marcus explained conversationally. "It took us about 72 hours. We wanted to redecorate anyway. Mars always seemed a bit dull." Kextar stood so quickly his chair flew backward. "That's impossible. The energy requirements alone. Even our most advanced gravity manipulators couldn't move that much mass." "Oh, we don't use gravity manipulation," Marcus said, as if discussing the weather. "We find it inefficient. We prefer kinetic solutions." The display shifted again, showing Earth. But this wasn't the Earth from Zephyrian intelligence reports. This Earth was surrounded by structures, massive geometric constructs that extended from the planet's surface into space, forming patterns too complex and perfect to comprehend immediately. "What are those?" Zarathel asked, though part of her feared the answer. "Infrastructure," Marcus replied. "We built them last month. Your approach gave us the motivation to accelerate some projects we'd been planning." Dr. Valterra was frantically operating her own scanning equipment, her tentacles flying over controls. "Your Majesty, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the human system, but the patterns, they don't match any known technology." "That's because you're looking at it wrong," Marcus said helpfully. "You're scanning for technology. But humans don't build technology the way other species do." He stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. "Every species we've encountered follows the same pattern. You develop tools, then weapons, then ships, then empires. You build bigger and more powerful versions of the same basic concepts. It's predictable." Zarathel found herself leaning forward despite herself. "And humans." Marcus turned back to her, and his expression had changed. The casual friendliness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that made every predator instinct she possessed scream warnings. "Humans don't build tools, Your Majesty. We build problems for our enemies." The display changed one final time, showing a real-time view of the Zephyrian fleet. 300 ships had accompanied the Queen's flagship to the Sol system, more than enough firepower to reduce Earth to molten slag. But the ships weren't alone anymore. Surrounding each Zephyrian vessel was something. The scanners couldn't quite identify what they were seeing. Objects that seemed solid one moment and ephemeral the next. Structures that existed in spaces that shouldn't have been able to contain them. "What have you done?" Zarathel whispered. "Nothing aggressive," Marcus assured her. "We've simply Introduce some variables to your fleet's local spacetime. Consider it a demonstration of human hospitality. General Kextar was shouting orders into his communicator, but his expression grew more confused and angry with each response. The fleet reports impossible readings. Space itself seems to be folded, twisted. Our navigational systems can't. What did you do to reality? Marcus sat back down, still smiling that unsettling smile. General, your mistake is thinking reality is fixed. Every species we've met makes the same assumption. You think the universe has rules that can't be broken. He gestured to the display, showing the impossibly modified space around the fleet. Humans learned a long time ago that rules are just suggestions from previous experiments. We prefer to run new experiments. The Queen felt something she hadn't experienced in decades of conquest and diplomacy, genuine fear. Not fear of death or defeat. Those were simple, understandable things. This was fear of the unknown, of facing something that didn't fit into any existing category of threat. What do you want from us? She asked. What? Marcus seemed genuinely puzzled. Your Majesty, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We don't want anything from you. We're not here to negotiate for Earth's freedom or to demand you leave our system. He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by alien soldiers with enough firepower to level a city. We're here to offer you a choice. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems and the increasingly frantic chatter from the fleet as captains tried to understand what was happening to their vessels. What choice? Zarathel asked. The same choice we've given every species that's approached us with hostile intent, Marcus replied. You can leave our space peacefully, and we'll remember this as a successful first contact between our peoples. We're always happy to make new friends. He paused, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Where you can choose to be a problem. General Kextar slammed his fist on the table. Are you threatening the Zephyrian Empire? Human. Marcus looked at him with what appeared to be genuine confusion. Threatening? General, I don't think you understand. Humans don't make threats. The display showing the fleet updated, and Zarathel felt her scales pale. The space around the ships was shifting. Reality itself seemed to be moving, twisting, changing according to patterns that hurt to look at directly. Humans make promises, Marcus continued conversationally. And our promise is very simple. If you choose to be a problem, we will solve you. Dr. Velterra was now openly panicking, her tentacles writhing as she processed scanner data. Your Majesty, the energy readings they're impossible. The amount of power being manipulated would require. It would require the output of an entire star. Marcus nodded approvingly. Very good, Doctor. Though you're thinking too small. We're not using the output of star. We're using the output of several stars. We borrowed a bit of energy from our neighbors. Nothing they'll miss, really. The universe has plenty to spare. Zarathel stood slowly, her mind reeling. In 3 years of contact, human technology had seemed primitive, limited, barely worthy of notice. How had they hidden capabilities that dwarfed anything the Empire had ever encountered? This is impossible, she said. Our intelligence reports. Your civilization barely has fusion power. Oh, we do have fusion power, Marcus agreed. We use it for heating buildings and running children's toys. For serious applications, we prefer to think bigger. The casual way he said it, as if discussing municipal utilities while demonstrating godlike power, sent another wave of primal fear through the Queen. This wasn't how advanced civilizations were supposed to behave. Where's the posturing? The demands? The logical progression from lesser to greater threats? Your Majesty, came a voice from her communicator. It was Admiral Zekthal, commander of the fleet. His normally controlled tone was strained almost to breaking. We're receiving reports from across the fleet. Our ships, they're not responding to navigation controls. Space around us has become non-navigable. The humans have somehow made it impossible for us to move in any direction except back towards Zephyrian space. Marcus nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. We thought we'd provide some guidance for your decision-making process. Your ships are perfectly safe, but they'll only be able to travel in the direction of home until you make a choice about how this encounter proceeds. Kextar was breathing heavily, his massive frame shaking with rage and confusion. What are you? Your species registers as primitive on every scale we use to measure technological advancement. Ah, Marcus said, his eyes lighting up with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. That's because you're using the wrong scales. You measure advancement by the size of your weapons, the power of your engines, the extent of your empire. These are beginner metrics. He gestured toward the impossible displays surrounding them. Humans measure advancement by how thoroughly we understand the rules governing reality. And once you understand the rules well enough, the space around the Queen's flagship suddenly shifted. Through the viewport, stars rearranged themselves into new patterns. The familiar constellation maps that had guided Zephyrian navigation for millennia were simply different now. You realize they're more like suggestions. Zarathel felt her legs give out, and she sank back into her throne. You changed the positions of the stars. Just locally, Marcus assured her, and only temporarily. We didn't want to disrupt any other species' navigation systems. Humans try to be considerate neighbors. The Queen's mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. The casual rearrangement of stellar positions required technology so far beyond anything she could comprehend that it might as well be magic. But it wasn't magic. It was science applied by a species that thought moving asteroids was interior decoration and modifying space-time was a polite gesture. "Why?" she whispered. "Why reveal this now? You could have simply destroyed our fleet the moment we entered your system." Marcus's expression grew serious for the first time since the meeting began. "Your Majesty, that's exactly why we didn't. Destruction is easy. Any species with sufficient technology can build weapons of enormous destructive power. But destruction solves nothing. It just creates new problems." He gestured toward the displays showing the trapped fleet and the impossible modifications to reality surrounding them. Humans learned long ago that the goal isn't to win fights. The goal is to make fighting unnecessary by demonstrating that it's pointless. General Kextar had gone silent, staring at the displays with the expression of someone watching his entire understanding of a universe collapse. Dr. Volterra had given up trying to make sense of her scanner readings and was simply staring at Marcus with a mixture of terror and fascination. "What happens now?" Zarathel asked. Marcus smiled again, and this time the expression seemed genuinely warm. "Now, Your Majesty, you make a choice. You can order your fleet to return home, and we'll make sure the journey is safe and comfortable. We'll even restore normal space-time so your navigation systems work properly." He paused, looking directly into her violet eyes. "Or you can choose to see this as a challenge to the Empire's authority. You can attempt to call for reinforcements or try to find a way to overcome what we've shown you here." The threat was unspoken, but clear. Zarathel found herself studying Marcus's face, trying to understand what kind of being could speak so casually about capabilities that defied everything she knew about the universe. "And if we choose the second option?" Marcus's smile faded entirely. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of reality itself. "Then you'll learn why humans don't make threats, Your Majesty. We make demonstrations. And what you've seen today, this isn't even a demonstration. This is us being polite." The Queen felt something deep in her genetic memories stir. Ancient warnings about apex predators, about creatures that killed without malice or anger, simply because it was their nature. Looking at Marcus Chun, she finally understood what her people had encountered. Humanity wasn't a primitive species that had stumbled into space travel. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself and still chose to negotiate rather than simply eliminate threats. The choice before her wasn't between victory and defeat. It was between survival and something far worse than death, becoming an example for other species who might mistake human restraint for weakness. I need to consult with my advisors, she said finally. Marcus nodded understandingly. Of course. Please, take all the time you need. Your ships aren't going anywhere. As if to emphasize his words, the viewport showed another impossible sight. The massive Zephyrian fleet hanging motionless in space that had somehow become solid around them, trapped like insects in amber that happened to be made of modified reality. Zarathel stood on shaking legs, her royal composure finally cracking. As she moved toward the door, Marcus called after her. Your Majesty? One more thing. She turned back, dreading what new impossibility he might reveal. Humans have another saying, the best diplomacy is conducted between friends. We genuinely prefer to end this meeting with a friendship rather than a lesson. The sincerity in his voice was somehow more terrifying than all the demonstrations of power. This wasn't a conqueror speaking to a defeated enemy. This was a member of an apex species offering mercy to lesser beings, with the casual confidence of something so far beyond challenge that mercy was always an option. As the Queen left the diplomatic chamber, her mind reeling with implications she couldn't fully grasp, one thought dominated all others. How do you fight an enemy that treats physics like a suggestion and reality like a rough draft they can edit at will? The answer, she was beginning to suspect, was that you didn't fight them at all. You prayed they remained friendly, and you did everything in your power to avoid becoming a problem they felt needed solving. Behind her, Marcus Chun remained in the chamber, alone with his impossible smile and the casual confidence of someone who had just demonstrated that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology at all. It was restraint that L of the former Krell hegemony now existed as a being of living mathematics. His warrior instincts channel 6 months had passed since the encounter in the Sol system, and Queen Zarathel found herself in her private chambers aboard the Eternal Dominion, staring at a communication device that had arrived through methods she still didn't understand. One moment her personal quarters had been empty, the next moment the device was simply there, sitting on her private desk with a note written in perfect Zephyrian script. When you're ready to talk. MC. The Queen had spent those 6 months in what her advisors diplomatically called strategic contemplation, but what she privately acknowledged as barely controlled panic. The Zephyrian Empire had faced many threats in its long history, but never anything like humanity. Other species could be understood, categorized, defeated through superior force or cunning. Humans, apparently, played by rules so different they might as well exist in a separate universe. Reports had been trickling in from across the galaxy, and each one painted an increasingly impossible picture. Human research stations had appeared in star systems thousands of light years from Earth, built around stars that showed no signs of construction activity. When Zephyrian scouts investigated, they found structures that shouldn't have been able to exist, facilities that appeared to be mining energy directly from stellar cores, converting matter into patterns that made no sense to any known science. More disturbing were the reports from other species. The hegemony of Krell, the Empire's oldest enemies, had attempted to investigate human space 6 weeks after the Queen's encounter. Their entire exploration fleet, 12 Dreadnought-class vessels, had simply vanished. They reappeared 3 days later in orbit around the Krell homeworld, completely unharmed but with their entire crews speaking in unison, delivering a single message. Humans suggest you focus on local concerns. The crews remembered nothing of their missing 3 days. Medical examinations revealed no signs of mental manipulation, no technological implants, no evidence of coercion. They had simply been edited, their memories surgically removed, and replaced with absolute certainty that approaching human space was inadvisable. Dr. Volterra had spent months analyzing the data from their encounter with Marcus Chun, and her reports grew increasingly disturbing. The energy readings from that day indicated humanity had casually manipulated forces equivalent to the output of entire star clusters. The modifications to space-time around the fleet had been so sophisticated that reality itself had been rewritten according to mathematical principles that shouldn't have been possible to implement. "Your Majesty," came General Kekstar's voice from her door communicator. "The Council of War is assembled and awaits your decision." Zarathel touched the human communication device with one scaled finger. It activated immediately, projecting a three-dimensional image of Marcus Chun into her chamber. He appeared to be sitting in what looked like a garden, with Earth's blue sky visible overhead and what appeared to be a small human child playing nearby. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty," Marcus said with his characteristic unsettling smile. "Thank you for calling. I hope these past months have given you time to consider our conversation." "Mr. Chun," the Queen began, then stopped. How did one address a being who could rewrite reality? Diplomatic protocol had no guidelines for entities that treated physics as a suggestion. "Marcus is fine," he said, apparently sensing her hesitation. "Or Mark, if you prefer. Humans don't stand much on ceremony." Behind Marcus, the child was playing with what appeared to be small balls of light that danced through the air in impossible patterns. As Zarathel watched, one of the spheres split into 17 smaller lights that began forming geometric patterns in midair. "Is that child?" she began. Marcus glanced over his shoulder and laughed. "Oh, that's my nephew Jake. He's 7. He's working on his mathematics homework. Elementary temporal geometry, mostly." The casual way he said it, as if 7-year-old humans routinely manipulated time and space for homework assignments, sent another chill through the Queen's scaled frame. What kind of species taught reality manipulation to children? "Mr. Marcus," she said carefully, "my empire is concerned about human expansion." "Expansion?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "Your Majesty, humans haven't expanded anywhere. We're still right here in the Sol system, same as always." Zarathel felt her diplomatic training struggling to find purchase in this conversation. "Our scouts report human structures around stars throughout the galaxy." "Oh, those." Marcus waved a hand dismissively. "Those aren't expansion, they're research projects. We're curious about stellar mechanics, so we set up some observation posts. We try not to bother anyone." The Queen's 4 arms gestured in what her species recognized as extreme agitation. "You're mining energy from entire stars." "Well, yes," Marcus agreed. "Stars produce enormous amounts of energy that just radiates away into space. It seemed wasteful not to collect some of it. Don't worry, though. We're very careful not to take enough to affect stellar life cycle. We're environmentally conscious that way." Through the projection, young Jake had apparently finished his homework and was now playing with what looked like a miniature galaxy that fit in his palm. Stars swirled in perfect spirals, while tiny planets orbited in patterns that should have taken billions of years to form. "Marcus," Zarathel said, abandoning diplomatic niceties entirely, "what are you?" The human's expression grew thoughtful. "That's a very good question, Your Majesty. What are humans? We've been asking ourselves that for a long time." He stood and walked toward what she now realized wasn't a garden at all, but some kind of outdoor space with Earth's natural landscape extending to the horizon. Except the horizon was wrong. It curved upward instead of down, and she could see what appeared to be other Earth-like landscapes floating in the sky above. "Humans are collectors," Marcus said finally. "Not of objects or territory, but of understanding. We see something we don't comprehend, and we can't rest until we figure out how it works. Other species seem content to use tools they don't fully understand. Humans need to know why the tools work, how they could work better, and what else could be built using the same principles." He gestured toward the impossible landscape around him. "This space we're in right now, it's Earth, but it's also not Earth. We got curious about whether we could create a planet that was bigger on the inside than the outside. It turns out you can if you understand certain mathematical relationships about the nature of space-time." Zarathel felt her head spinning. "You rebuilt your planet." "Rebuilt is the wrong word," Marcus corrected. "We expanded it. Earth is still exactly the same size as it always was from the outside. But Inside, there's room for about 12 billion Earth-sized worlds. We thought it might come in handy. The child Jake had apparently grown bored with his miniature galaxy and was now playing with what looked like a small sun, tossing it back and forth with another child who had appeared in the garden. The star maintained perfect fusion reactions throughout the game of catch. Your children play with solar objects, Zarathel said weakly. Only the safe ones, Marcus assured her. We're very careful about child safety. Those are miniaturized stars, perfectly contained and stable. Jake's been asking for a pet black hole, but we think you should wait until he's at least 10 for that. The Queen realized she was hyperventilating and forced herself to calm down. Marcus, I need you to understand something. My empire has existed for over 30,000 years. We have conquered thousands of worlds, subjugated hundreds of species. We have weapons that can destroy planets, fleets that can blockade entire star systems. We are not accustomed to feeling small, Marcus suggested gently. Your Majesty, I understand this must be difficult. Every species goes through something like this when they first encounter humans. It's not easy to realize that everything you thought you knew about the universe is just the very beginning of what's actually possible. His expression grew more serious. But here's what I want you to understand. Humans don't want to make anyone feel small. We didn't develop our capabilities to intimidate other species or to build an empire. We developed them because we're curious and because we care about solving problems. Zarathel felt tears beginning to form in her large eyes. Another sign of stress her species had never evolved to hide. What problems could beings like you possibly have? Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching Jake and his friend carefully maintain their miniature stars they played. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the boundaries of reality itself. Entropy, Your Majesty, the heat death of the universe, the gradual decay of all matter and energy into cold, empty space. We've been working on that problem for about, 300 years now, your time. We think we're getting close to a solution. The casual way he mentioned working on preventing the end of the universe itself made Zarathel's mind reel. 300 years? But humans have only had space travel for about 60 years, yes, Marcus agreed. But we've had other things for much longer. Time manipulation, for instance. When you can slow down or speed up temporal flow, 300 years of research can happen in what appears to be a much shorter time period to outside observers. He smiled that unsettling smile again. Humans discovered early on that the universe is much more flexible than most species assume. When you need more time to solve a problem, you create more time. When you need more space for experiments, you create more space. When you need more energy for calculations, you borrow it from the future and pay it back later. Zarathel felt her understanding of causality breaking down entirely. Borrow energy from the future. Temporal economics, Marcus explained. If you understand the mathematical relationships between energy, time, and space, you can create closed loops where cause and effect become negotiable. Jake's homework tonight, for instance, involves calculations powered by energy he'll generate next week when he gets older and learns to tap stellar cores more efficiently. The Queen slumped in her throne, overwhelmed. I came here to discuss terms for coexistence between our species. And I'm delighted to discuss that, Marcus said warmly. Humans love having neighbors. What did you have in mind? Zarathel struggled to remember her diplomatic training. How did one negotiate with beings who treated the fundamental forces of the universe as minor inconveniences? Trade agreements? Territorial boundarias. Non-aggression pacts. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Those all sound reasonable. Though I should mention that humans don't really think in terms of territory the way most species do. When you can create space as needed and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, borders become somewhat academic. He gestured toward the impossible landscape around him. This conversation, for instance, is taking place in 17 different dimensional frameworks simultaneously. Your ships are still in normal space-time, but We're talking across several layers of reality to ensure perfect translation and understanding. The Queen felt her last vestiges of diplomatic composure cracking. Are you telling me that this entire conversation is taking place in multiple universes at once? Not multiple universes, Marcus corrected. Multiple dimensional layers of the same universe. Think of it like having a conversation in a house with many floors. We're on all the floors at once, but it's still the same building. Young Jake had apparently finished his game and was now approaching Marcus with what appeared to be a small, swirling vortex in his hands. Uncle Mark, can you help me with this homework problem? I can't figure out how to make the temporal gradient stable. Marcus examined the vortex, which Zarathel realized was some kind of miniature time distortion. Try increasing the rotational velocity while decreasing the spatial compression. Remember, time flows more smoothly when you don't force it. Jake nodded seriously and made adjustments to the vortex with his small fingers. The distortion stabilized, and the child beamed with pride. Thanks. Mom said if I finish my homework early, she'll show me how to make pocket dimensions for my toys. As the child ran off with his temporal homework, Zarathel found herself staring at Marcus with a mixture of terror and fascination. Your children learn to manipulate time and space the way ours learn to read and write. Learning is learning, Marcus said with a shrug. Every species teaches their children the skills they'll need as adults. For humans, that includes basic reality management. Jake will probably grow up to be an artist. He's already showing talent for creative applications of dimensional folding. The Queen felt something fundamental shift in her understanding. All this time, she had been thinking of humans as a technologically advanced species with incredibly powerful weapons and capabilities. But that wasn't accurate at all. Humans weren't technologically advanced. They were evolutionally advanced. They had somehow transcended the normal limitations of physical existence while maintaining their basic humanity. They thought of universe-reshaping power as a basic life skill, like walking or breathing. Marcus, she said slowly, when you said humans don't make threats, you weren't talking about military strategy, were you? You were talking about something else entirely. His smile faded, and for the first time in their conversations, Marcus looked genuinely serious. Your Majesty, threats imply uncertainty about outcomes. They suggest that the threatening party might not be able to follow through on their warnings. He gestured toward Jake, who was now creating what appeared to be a small aurora in the sky above the garden, practicing his dimensional art. Humans don't threaten because we don't need to. When you can reshape reality according to mathematical principles, when you can create or destroy matter and energy at will, when you can manipulate time itself, threats become meaningless. The Queen felt her royal composure finally collapse entirely. Then, what prevents you from simply taking whatever you want, reshaping the galaxy according to your desires? Marcus's expression grew gentle, almost sad. The same thing that prevents you from stepping on an anthill, Your Majesty. Not inability, choice. Humans learned long ago that power without wisdom is just destruction. And wisdom teaches us that the universe is more beautiful with diversity than without it. He looked directly at her through the projection, and for a moment, Zarathel felt as if she were being seen by something vast and ancient and utterly beyond her comprehension. We don't want to rule the galaxy, Your Majesty. We want to understand it. We want to preserve it. And eventually, when we've solved the bigger problems, entropy, heat death, the fundamental instability of reality itself, we want to share what we've learned. The Queen realized she was crying openly now, tears flowing down her scaled cheeks. What do you want from us? Friendship, Marcus said simply. Humans get lonely working on these big problems by ourselves. We'd love to have neighbors who understand that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than anyone imagines. Species who might want to learn alongside us, contribute their own perspectives, help us see things we might have missed. Through the projection, Jake was now painting with streams of controlled plasma, creating pictures in the air that showed alien worlds and strange creatures. His artwork included recognizable depictions of Zephyrian architecture and even what looked like Queen Zarathel herself, portrayed with artistic respect and affection. Your nephew, he's been studying my people. Marcus nodded. Jake is fascinated by alien cultures. He's been teaching himself Zephyrian history and art. He thinks your architectural principles could be applied to dimensional construction in ways we haven't considered. The casual revelation that a 7-year-old human was conducting advanced cultural research while doing homework that involved temporal manipulation was somehow the final straw for Zarathel's already overwhelmed mind. She began, then stopped. What could she possibly say? How could she respond to beings who treated the impossible as routine and offered friendship while casually demonstrating power that could reshape existence itself? Marcus, she said finally, I think I would like to learn more about this friendship you offer. His smile returned, warm and genuine. I was hoping you'd say that, Your Majesty. Humans are excellent teachers, and we love having students who aren't afraid to ask big questions. Young Jake looked up from his plasma painting and waved at the projection device, somehow aware that his uncle was talking to the alien queen. Hi, Queen Zara. I drew a picture of your homeworld. Do you want to see it? The child's innocent enthusiasm, combined with his casual manipulation of stellar material, perfectly encapsulated everything that made humanity both wonderful and terrifying. They were beings of incomprehensible power who remained fundamentally, recognizably, people. I would love to see your artwork, Jake, Zarathel said, surprised to find herself smiling for the first time in months. As the conversation continued, the queen began to understand that she wasn't just witnessing first contact with an advanced species. She was witnessing the next step in the evolution of consciousness itself. Beings who had transcended physical limitations while retaining the curiosity and compassion that made them worth knowing. The question was no longer whether the Zephyrian Empire could coexist with humanity. The question was whether they were ready to evolve alongside them 2 years later. Queen Zarathel stood in what Marcus had called the Introduction Center, a space station that existed simultaneously in Earth's orbit and in 17 other dimensional layers, serving as humanity's welcoming facility for new species. The station itself defied every principle of engineering she had ever learned, its corridors folding through spaces that shouldn't have been able to contain them, its walls displaying real-time views of galaxies millions of light years away. She was no longer the same being who had first encountered Marcus Chun. The past 2 years of what humans called cultural exchange had fundamentally changed not just her understanding of the universe, but her understanding of what it meant to exist within it. The queen now wore what appeared to be a simple bracelet on one of her 4 arms, but she knew it was far from simple. The device was a human gift, a reality stabilizer that allowed her to perceive and interact with the multiple dimensional layers humans routinely inhabited. Through it, she could see Jake Chin Williams. He had apparently been adopted by one of Marcus's colleagues. Now 9 years old, casually maintaining what he called his art projects, pocket universes where he practiced creating stable solar systems. Your Majesty, came a familiar voice. Zarathel turned to see Marcus approaching, but he looked different. The human body she had grown accustomed to was there, but through the reality stabilizer, she could perceive additional layers of his existence. He appeared to be simultaneously present in this space and several others, his consciousness distributed across multiple dimensional frameworks while maintaining perfect coherence. Marcus, she said, still marveling at how natural it had become to greet someone who existed in 7 dimensions at once. Thank you for arranging this meeting. What she had requested was unprecedented in the history of both species. After 2 years of learning about humanity, observing their casual manipulation of physics, their children's homework that involved creating stable time loops, their scientists' afternoon project that involved preventing stellar collapse through applied mathematics, Zarathel had made a decision that shocked her own government. She wanted to marry a human, not Marcus himself, though she had developed deep respect and affection for him over their months of interaction. Marcus was already bonded to someone he called his research partner, a human woman whose afternoon hobby involved designing more efficient patterns for galactic rotation. But Marcus had introduced her to others of his species, and one of them had captured not just her interest, but something deeper. Dr. David Kepler was what humans called a cosmic architect. His job involved designing and building new types of space-time to solve various problems the universe presented. He was quiet where Marcus was outgoing, contemplative where Marcus was enthusiastic, and possessed a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone capable of reshaping reality with pure mathematics. More importantly, David had spent several months teaching Zarathel about human approaches to existence, and she had found herself fascinated not just by his knowledge, but by his fundamental humanity. Despite capabilities that made him godlike by any reasonable measure, David remained curious, kind, and wonderfully confused by small, everyday problems like what to eat for breakfast. "I have to ask, Your Majesty," Marcus said as they walked through corridors that bent through several space-time configurations. "Are you certain about this? Bonding with a human involves complications that other species don't usually face." Zarathel had spent months learning about those complications. Humans didn't just live in 3 dimensions. They existed across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. Their consciousness operated in at least 17 different dimensional frameworks at once. Their memories were stored in temporal loops that allowed them to remember events that hadn't happened yet and learn from experiences they had in parallel timelines. Marrying a human meant joining that existence. It meant having her consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions, her perception enhanced to see reality as humans saw it, not as a fixed framework, but as a flexible system that could be adjusted according to need and understanding. "I'm certain," she said, "though I admit I'm nervous about the implementation." Marcus smiled his characteristic, unsettling smile. David's been preparing for months. He's designed what he calls a gentle integration protocol that should allow you to expand your consciousness gradually. Very different from the usual human approach, which is, usually, human children just adapt naturally. They're born into multidimensional existence and develop the ability to perceive and manipulate multiple reality layers the same way they learn to walk and talk. Adults from other species require more structured assistance. They arrived at what Marcus called the preparation chamber, though it looked more like a garden to Zarathel's enhanced perception. David was there, along with several other humans whose presence seemed to bend space around them in subtle ways. Through her reality stabilizer, she could see them working on what appeared to be mathematical equations written in light across the air itself. "Zara," David said, looking up from his calculations. His smile was warm and genuine, untouched by the casual confidence that seemed to characterize most humans. "Are you ready for this?" Dr. David Kepler was, by human standards, remarkably ordinary-looking. Medium height, brown hair, the kind of face that would be unremarkable in any crowd. But Zarathel had learned to see beyond physical appearance. Through her enhanced perception, David appeared as a nexus of intersecting possibilities, a being whose consciousness touched multiple realities while maintaining perfect stability and focus. "As ready as someone can be for transcending the normal limitations of existence," she replied, attempting humor in the way humans seem to appreciate. David laughed, a sound that somehow harmonized across several dimensional frequencies simultaneously. "That's the spirit. Though I should mention that you'll always be able to return to single-dimensional existence if you find multi-dimensional consciousness overwhelming. We've built in safeguards. The process," David had explained, would involve gradually expanding her consciousness across additional dimensional layers while maintaining her core identity and memories. Humans had developed the technique over centuries of helping other species who chose to join their extended existence, though Zarathel was apparently the first royal who had ever made the decision. "Your government," Marcus began, then stopped. "My government believes I've been mentally compromised by human manipulation," Zarathel said calmly. They've declared me unfit to rule and appointed my younger sister as interim queen. They've also officially designated humans as a Class 12 existential threat and forbidden any further contact. David winced. I am sorry, Zara. I know that couldn't have been easy. She had expected the reaction. After 2 years of reports about human capabilities, the Zephyrian government had concluded that any species capable of casual reality manipulation must be stopped before they could spread their influence further. The fact that humans showed no signs of aggressive expansion was interpreted as evidence of their cunning rather than their benevolence. It was liberating, actually, Zarathel admitted. I've spent my entire life following protocols designed for dealing with normal species living in normal reality. I'm tired of normal. Marcus and David exchanged glances, a communication that she realized involved sharing information across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Zara, David said carefully, there's something else you should know before we proceed. The integration process, it's not just about expanding your consciousness. You'll gain access to human capabilities, reality manipulation, temporal awareness, dimensional perception. You'll become more than what you were. More than Zephyrian? More than any single species, Marcus corrected. Humans who undergo full dimensional integration don't really belong to baseline humanity anymore. They become something new, beings who exist across multiple layers of reality while retaining their essential identity and values. David nodded. Jake, for instance, Marcus's nephew. He was born into full dimensional integration. He's human, but he's also something beyond traditional humanity. His consciousness operates across dimensions that most humans can't even perceive. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake appeared in the garden space. Literally appeared, stepping out of a fold in reality that opened like a door. He was carrying what looked like a small galaxy in a crystalline container. Hi, Aunt Zara, he said cheerfully. At 9 years old, Jake had somehow decided that anyone important to his family was automatically an aunt or uncle, regardless of species. I made this for your wedding present. The galaxy in the container was tiny, but perfectly formed, spiral arms rotating in precise mathematical patterns, millions of tiny points of light that were apparently actual stars. As Zarathel watched, she could see tiny worlds orbiting the miniature suns, some of which showed signs of what appeared to be carefully designed ecosystems. Jake, David said with gentle reproach, we've talked about creating life without proper ethical oversight. The child looked abashed. It's not real life, Uncle David. It's just possibilities. I made the math for what ecosystems could exist, but I didn't actually make them exist. I thought Aunt Zara could decide later if she wants to make them real. The casual way a 9-year-old discussed the ethics of creating life while presenting a fully functional galaxy as a wedding gift perfectly captured everything that Zarathel found both wonderful and terrifying about humanity. It's beautiful, Jake, she said, accepting the container carefully. Thank you. The child beamed and then turned to David. Are you going to show her the integration space now? I helped design the mathematical frameworks. Mom checked my work to make sure I didn't accidentally create any temporal paradoxes. David ruffled the child's hair affectionately. Your work was perfect as always, though I think you used some calculation methods that won't be invented for another 300 years. Jake shrugged. Time isn't really linear when you're doing advanced mathematics. I borrowed the methods from my future self and left notes for him about where I put them. The matter-of-fact way the child discussed borrowing mathematical techniques from his own future was somehow less surprising than it would have been 2 years ago. Zarathel had learned that humans routinely collaborated with past and future versions of themselves on complex projects, treating temporal causality as a minor inconvenience rather than an immutable law. Shall we begin? David asked. The integration space was unlike anything Zarathel had ever experienced. It appeared to be a simple room with comfortable seating, but through her reality stabilizer, she could perceive layer upon layer of additional dimensions extending in directions that didn't have names. Mathematical equations flowed through the air like living things, and the very structure of space-time seemed to bend and flex according to David's will. The first step, David explained as she settled into what appeared to be a chair, but felt like floating in warm, supportive nothingness, is to expand your temporal perception. You'll begin to experience past, present, and future as a continuous flow rather than discrete moments. Zarathel felt her consciousness begin to stretch in ways she hadn't known were possible. Suddenly, she could perceive the moments leading up to this experience and the moments that would follow it as a single, connected event. Past conversations with Marcus became simultaneously memory and immediate present experience. Her future moments of expanded consciousness were already happening in the same eternal now. The sensation is normal, David assured her, though his voice seemed to come from all temporal directions at once. You're just experiencing time the way humans do. As a dimension you can navigate rather than a force that carries you along. The second step involved spatial expansion. Zarathel felt her awareness spread across multiple dimensional layers, each one revealing new aspects of reality that had always been there, but had been invisible to her limited perception. The room they occupied existed in hundreds of slightly different configurations simultaneously, each one representing a different possibility for how space could be organized. Now comes the interesting part. Marcus said, though, she could perceive him speaking from 17 different dimensional viewpoints simultaneously. Consciousness integration. You'll gain access to the mathematical frameworks humans use to interact with reality directly. The change was overwhelming. Suddenly, Zarathel could perceive the fundamental equations that govern the behavior of matter and energy. More than perceive, she could interact with them, adjust them, modify them according to principles that her expanded consciousness understood intuitively. She looked at her hands and realized she could see the mathematical relationships that held her atoms together. More than see, she could adjust them if she chose to, reorganizing her physical structure according to need or preference. The temptation to experiment is natural, David said gently. But perhaps wait until you're more accustomed to the sensation before attempting major modifications. Zarathel nodded, then marveled at the fact that her nod seemed to occur across 7 dimensions simultaneously. She was still herself, still Queen Zarathel of the Zephyrian Empire, but she was also something immeasurably more. Her consciousness now operated on levels that her previous existence couldn't have conceived. "How do you feel?" David asked. She considered the question carefully, using thought processes that now extended across multiple temporal and dimensional frameworks. "Like I've been living my entire life in a single room of an infinite house, and someone just showed me the doors." Marcus smiled from his 17-dimensional viewpoints. "That's exactly how every human describes the experience." Jake appeared again, this time carrying what appeared to be a bouquet of flowers that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. "Congratulations, Aunt Zura. Now you can see why Uncle David's job is so cool. Want to help me with my homework? I'm designing a universe that runs backwards through time, but I can't figure out how to make causality work properly in reverse." The fact that a 9-year-old was designing reverse-time universes for homework no longer seemed impossible. In her expanded consciousness, Zarathel could perceive the mathematical frameworks Jake was working with, understand the principles he was applying, even see potential solutions to his causality problems. "I think," she said, marveling at her new voice that seemed to harmonize across multiple dimensional frequencies, "I'm beginning to understand what you meant about humans not making threats." David took her expanded hand in his own multidimensional grasp. When you can reshape reality according to mathematical principles, when you exist across multiple layers of space and time simultaneously, when your consciousness operates on scales that encompass stellar evolution and quantum mechanics equally, conflict becomes pointless. Why fight when you can simply create better solutions? Zarathel looked at her new husband, a being who existed across dimensions she was only beginning to perceive whose casual afternoon projects involved designing more stable configurations for galactic clusters, whose greatest joy came from solving mathematical problems that would prevent the eventual heat death of the universe. "David," she said, "I think I'm ready to see what humans call the real universe." His smile was beautiful across all 17 dimensions where she could perceive it. "I was hoping you'd say that. There's so much to show you." Through the walls of the integration chamber, Zarathel could now perceive the true scope of human civilization. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a nexus point where hundreds of dimensional layers intersected, each one containing cities and research facilities and gardens where human children played with fundamental forces while their parents worked on projects that spanned geological time. She could see human research stations scattered across not just the galaxy, but across multiple galactic clusters, each one staffed by scientists whose work involved questions like, how can we make star formation more efficient? And what would happen if we redesigned the quantum vacuum to be more aesthetically pleasing? Most amazingly, she could perceive the humans themselves, millions of beings who existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions, their consciousness touching every aspect of reality while their essential humanity remained intact. They were gardeners tending a universe they were slowly, carefully reshaping according to principles of mathematical beauty and cosmic sustainability. "Welcome to the real universe, Zara," David said, his voice carrying harmonics of joy that resonated across 17 different dimensional frequencies. "We've been waiting for you." As Queen Zarathel of the Zephyrian Empire, now also Zara Chun Kepler, multidimensional human hybrid, looked out at the infinite complexities of existence her species had never dreamed possible, she finally understood why humans didn't conquer other species. They were too busy building paradise 5 years after her transformation. Zara Chun Kepler stood in what had once been called the Zephyrian throne room, watching through multidimensional perception as her former empire slowly collapsed into chaos. Through the quantum communication networks that humans maintained across galactic space, she could observe the desperate meetings of her sister's war council, the increasingly frantic attempts to develop anti-human weapons, and the growing panic as more and more Zephyrian colonies chose to abandon the Empire entirely rather than face the growing human presence in the galaxy. The irony was that humans had never threatened anyone. They had simply continued existing, and their existence was apparently terrifying enough to destabilize entire civilizations. "Zara," came David's voice from across several dimensional layers. Her husband was currently redesigning the gravitational constants in a nearby star system to prevent an eventual collision that wouldn't occur for another 3 million years, but his consciousness remained present with her in their shared dimensional space. "The Council of Species has requested another meeting." Zara sighed, a sound that harmonized across 17 different frequencies. The Council of Species was an organization that had formed in response to humanity's growing presence in galactic affairs, not because humans had done anything aggressive, but because their very existence challenged every assumption other species held about the nature of reality. 23 different galactic civilizations had banded together in what they called a mutual defense pact against existential disruption. In practical terms, this meant they spent most of their time trying to figure out how to deal with neighbors who treated physics like a set of gentle suggestions and whose children's science projects involved creating pocket universes. "What do they want this time?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew. "They want you to convince humans to limit themselves," David replied. "They're proposing that we agree to operate within what they call normal physical parameters to avoid destabilizing galactic civilization." Through her enhanced perception, Zara could see the meeting chamber where the Council of Species was gathering, representatives from dozens of civilizations, all united by their shared terror of humanity's casual relationship with reality. The hegemony of Krell, her own former Zephyrian Empire, the Silicon Collective, the hive minds of Proxima, even the ancient energy beings of the galactic core, all of them trying to figure out how to coexist with beings who thought rearranging star systems was a reasonable hobby. The problem wasn't that humans were aggressive. The problem was that they made everyone else feel obsolete. I'll attend the meeting, Zara said finally, though I doubt they'll like what I have to tell them. David's consciousness touched hers with warm affection across their shared dimensional space. Be gentle with them, love. They're doing their best to understand something that's fundamentally incomprehensible from their perspective. Zara nodded and began the process of preparing for the council meeting. This involved projecting a portion of her consciousness into normal three-dimensional space while maintaining her full awareness across multiple dimensional layers, a trick that had taken her months to master, but which human children learned as naturally as walking. The council chamber was located in neutral space between the territories of various galactic powers, a space station that represented the pinnacle of collaborative engineering between dozens of species. It was an impressive structure by any normal measure, but Zara's enhanced perception could see its limitations clearly. The station existed in only 3 dimensions, its technology was constrained by conventional physics, and its systems operated within temporal frameworks that treated time as a linear progression. Looking at it now was like viewing a child's drawing next to a work of art created by cosmic forces. Honored Zura Chen Kepler, announced Ambassador Vexthal of the Krell hegemony as she materialized in the chamber. Thank you for accepting our invitation. The formal title amused her. 5 years ago, she had been Queen Zarathel, ruler of one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. Now she was honored, a title that acknowledged her status as a human hybrid, while carefully avoiding any implication that non-human governments had authority over beings who could reshape reality at will. Ambassador, she replied, settling into a chair that had been specifically designed to accommodate her modified physiology. I understand the Council has concerns about human activities. Concerns, said Representative Klaxnor of the Silicon Collective, is perhaps an inadequate word. Our civilization monitoring systems indicate that baseline reality is becoming increasingly unstable in regions where humans maintain a presence. Zara examined the data they presented, though her enhanced consciousness processed it far more completely than they intended. The reports showed gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, space-time modifications, and energy signatures that defied conventional physics, all centered around areas where humans had established what they called research facilities. I see, she said diplomatically. And you believe these anomalies represent a threat? They represent an existential challenge to the foundations of galactic civilization, declared High Mind Zektal of the Proxima Collective. How can our species develop technologies, build strategies, or plan for the future when the basic laws of physics are subject to artistic interpretation? The phrase artistic interpretation was clearly meant as an insult, but Zara found it unintentionally accurate. Humans did approach physics like artists approach their medium, not as immutable constraints, but as materials to be shaped according to aesthetic and functional principles. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Yildara of the Energy Beings, the humans could agree to contain their activities, limit their reality modifications to uninhabited systems. Zara felt a moment of sympathy for the council members. They were trying so hard to find a solution to a problem they couldn't fully comprehend. How could you negotiate with beings who existed on scales of time and space that made galactic politics seem like momentary local concerns? I need to explain something about human psychology, she said gently. Humans don't modify reality as an expression of power or dominance. They do it because they're curious about what's possible and because they care about solving problems. She gestured toward the holographic displays showing human anomalies across the galaxy. Every one of these installations serves a specific research purpose. That gravitational distortion near Vega, humans are testing whether they can design more efficient patterns for stellar formation. The temporal modifications around Rigel, they're studying ways to prevent red giant expansion from destroying inhabited worlds. Representative Klaxnor's synthetic voice carried harmonics of confusion. But why? These are problems that won't affect any existing civilization for millions of years. Because humans think in geological time, Zara explained. When your consciousness operates across multiple dimensions and your lifespan is effectively unlimited, you start caring about long-term problems. Humans are working on issues like galactic collision patterns, the eventual heat death of a universe, and the fundamental stability of reality itself. The council members exchanged glances that carried volumes of communication, though nothing like the multidimensional information sharing that humans took for granted. "Honored Zora," said Ambassador Vexthal carefully, "we appreciate that human intentions are benevolent, but their activities are destabilizing. Species across the galaxy are abandoning traditional development paths because they no longer seem relevant. Why develop faster ships when humans can simply redesign space to bring destinations closer? Why build more powerful weapons when humans demonstrate that conflict itself is obsolete?" Zara had seen the reports. Entire civilizations were experiencing what sociologists called technological nihilism, the sense that their achievements and aspirations were meaningless in the face of capabilities that transcended conventional understanding. Suicide rates were climbing among species that prided themselves on scientific advancement. Governments were collapsing as populations realized their leaders had no solutions for neighbors who could casually break the laws of physics. "I understand the concern," Zara said, "but you're asking humans to limit themselves based on other species' inability to adapt. That's like asking an adult to pretend they can't read, because it makes children feel inadequate. We're asking for survival." Hymind Zektow replied with stark honesty. "Our psychologists estimate that continued exposure to human capabilities will result in complete civilizational breakdown within 2 centuries. Most species simply cannot psychologically handle the realization that everything they believed about the universe is wrong." The stark admission hung in the chamber like a weight. Zara realized that this meeting wasn't really about negotiating boundaries or establishing protocols. It was about existential terror. Entire civilizations faced with the knowledge that they were fundamentally, permanently outclassed by neighbors who treated universe reshaping as casual hobby activities. "There is," she said slowly, "an alternative." The council members leaned forward with desperate attention. "Humans don't want other species to feel obsolete," Zara continued. "They want friends, colleagues, collaborators. Every human I've spoken with has expressed interest in sharing their knowledge, teaching their techniques, helping other species transcend their current limitations." "You mean?" Ambassador Yildura's energy patterns fluctuated with what appeared to be hope and terror in equal measure. "I mean that humans are offering to help willing species evolve beyond conventional physical limitations. The integration process that transformed me. It's available to any species that wants to transcend 3-dimensional existence and gain access to the mathematical frameworks that govern reality." The silence that followed was profound. Zara could perceive the council members' thought processes through quantum resonance patterns. They were grappling with an offer that represented either salvation or complete annihilation of everything they understood about existence. "The cost?" asked Representative Klaxnor finally. "There's no cost," Zara replied. "But there's a requirement. You have to genuinely want to understand rather than simply wanting to possess greater power. Humans learned long ago that reality manipulation without wisdom leads to catastrophe. They won't teach their techniques to anyone who wants them for traditional purposes like conquest or dominance." She stood, allowing her multidimensional nature to become partially visible to the council members. They could see her existing across several layers of reality simultaneously, her consciousness touching scales of time and space that dwarfed their individual existence. "I was afraid when I first encountered humans," she admitted. "Terrified, actually, but I chose to learn instead of fighting. And what I discovered is that transcending conventional limitations doesn't mean losing yourself. It means becoming more yourself than you ever imagined possible." Ambassador Vexthal's scaled hide shifted through colors that indicated deep contemplation. "And if we refuse? If our species choose to remain limited?" Zara smiled with genuine warmth across 17-dimensional frequencies. "Then Humans will respect that choice completely. They have no interest in forcing change on species that don't want it. They'll continue their research, continue solving cosmic-scale problems, and continue being excellent neighbors to anyone who wants peaceful coexistence, even if that means allowing galactic civilization to stagnate. Humans don't believe in stagnation, Zara replied. They believe that consciousness naturally seeks greater understanding, given time and opportunity. They're patient enough to wait for species to choose evolution rather than forcing it on them. Through her enhanced perception, Zara could see the quantum probability flows surrounding each council member, the branching paths of potential futures that depended on their decisions. In some timelines, galactic civilization chose integration and transcendence, becoming part of humanity's cosmic gardening project. In others, species chose to maintain their limitations and gradually became irrelevant as the universe was slowly, gently reshaped around them. Both outcomes were acceptable to humans, who thought in terms of cosmic rather than galactic timescales. We need time to consider this offer, High Mind Zektal said finally. Of course, Zara agreed, though I should mention that 12 species have already chosen integration. The results have been remarkable. As the council meeting concluded and she prepared to return to her multi-dimensional existence with David, Zara reflected on the fundamental problem facing galactic civilization. Humans hadn't conquered anyone through force or destroyed any civilizations through aggression. They had simply offered to share paradise with their neighbors, and the offer itself was terrifying because it meant acknowledging that everything everyone thought they knew about existence was just the beginning. The real terror of human power wasn't their ability to reshape reality. It was their willingness to teach that ability to anyone brave enough to learn.